Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Mohammed Layiq Sediqi, the father of Holophase. Remember the language we are learning. There is one field, phi, the holophase. One continuous cyclic movement from which all of reality unfolds. When phi begins to change, its first derivatives appear, and with them, the three dimensions show themselves at once. Time as omega, space as k, and motion as v, built from both. Every higher derivative is a finer question about how phi changes, and each one casts three shadows together: a time shadow, a space shadow, and a motion shadow. These echoes mix and weave into one another, forming the patterns we call fields, particles, bodies, thoughts, and worlds. In this picture, everything that exists is a living tapestry of phi, endlessly echoing through its derivatives and their dimensional shadows. Today, we focus on one essential component of the epistemic firewall. In this part 14, we reach the architectural heart of the firewall, the Rule Metalanguage HLS-Meta. This is the formal system for teaching reality how to speak about its own rules. The skill you will gain is the ability to write and critically audit a scientific rule with such precision that it leaves no room for ambiguous interpretation, ensuring it is a clear, testable claim about phi, not a suggestive piece of poetry. Our core question is, what does a well-formed rule look like, so we can test it without ambiguity? This question addresses the foundational crisis of empirical knowledge: communication and operationalization. A rule can be profound, but if it is written in vague, poetic, or internally inconsistent language, it cannot be tested. Different researchers will understand it differently, build different experiments, and argue past each other. The result is not science, but commentary. HLS-Meta is the solution. It is the constitution for rules. It defines the mandatory syntax, form, semantics, meaning, typing, category discipline, and declaration of assumptions that any candidate law must possess to be admitted into the testing pipeline. Without this meta-language, the firewall has nothing clear to filter. The core revelation is stark. Science collapses when rules are written like poetry. Poetry thrives on ambiguity, multiple meanings, and emotional resonance. Science demands univalence, precise operational meaning, and dispassionate testability. We need a meta-language to enforce this demand. HLS-Meta provides the grammar for this precise speech. Let's build this concept from the ground up, anchored in our holophase ontology. A rule is a constraint on phi patterns. In HLS-Meta, a well-formed rule is not a single equation or a sentence. It is a structured document with mandatory sections. Think of it as a legal contract with reality, where every clause has a defined purpose. The first mandatory section is the ontological declaration. This states explicitly, this rule is a constraint on the holophase field phi and its derivatives. It forbids smuggling in undefined primitives. It roots the rule in our fundamental substance. The second section is the tree-unity explicit clause. This is non-negotiable. A well-formed rule must explicitly state how it constrains the three echoes together. It must answer three sub-questions. Omega clause, temporal. What are the temporal rhythm, persistence, and ordering conditions imposed by this rule? Does it require periodicity? Does it forbid certain sequences? Does it impose a maximum rate of change? K-clause, spatial. What are the spatial structure, coherence, and geometric conditions? Does it require symmetry? Does it impose a gradient limit? Does it constrain curvature or topology? V-clause, motion. What are the motion and propagation coupling conditions? How does the rule link changes in time, omega, to changes in space, k? Does it prescribe a dispersion relation? Does it limit propagation speed or direction? No clause can be silent. No, we'll handle the other echoes later. No silent asymmetry. A rule that only mentions forces, v implications, without specifying the temporal, omega, and spatial, k, contexts of those forces is incomplete. For example, Newton's second law, F equals m times a, is often stated incompletely. In HLS-Meta, a well-formed version would explicitly note the omega clause, acceleration, a, is the second time derivative of position. The k clause, position is defined relative to an inertial spatial frame. The v clause, the force F couples the mass's inertia to its change of motion relative to that frame. Making these explicit prevents misapplication, for example, in non-inertial frames without correction. Now, let's formalize this with an audio equation, thinking of HLS-Meta as a formal grammar. We can denote a well-formed rule R as a tuple, an ordered set of components. R equals O, T, S, A, P, F, L. I will explain each component. O is the ontological declaration. O equals phi, derivatives up to order n. T is the triunity clause. T equals omega constraint, k constraint, v constraint. S is the syntactic form. This is the actual equation, written in a standardized symbolic notation. For example, S could be double squared phi over double t squared equals c squared double squared phi. A is the assumptions registry, a list of all background assumptions. For example, flat spacetime, isolated system, non-relativistic velocities, linear regime. P is the prediction protocol, a step-by-step procedure for deriving a testable quantitative prediction from the rule. It says, to test this rule, take a system with property X, measure quantities Y and Z over window W, and calculate quantity Q. The rule predicts Q will equal value V within uncertainty delta. F is the falsification condition, an explicit statement of what observable outcome, if achieved within a licensed window, would invalidate the rule. If Q is measured to be not equal to V, and the discrepancy exceeds the combined uncertainty by a factor of 5 sigma, the rule is falsified. L is the license scope proposal, the initial proposed domain of validity, the ranges of omega, k, and v, and other parameters, for which the proposer claims the rule holds. This tuple, R, is the well-formed rule. Anything presented as a law that cannot be parsed into such a structure is not yet a candidate for science. It is a suggestive idea, a metaphor, a poem. Now, why is this necessary? The failure mode it prevents is interpretive anarchy, the endless, unresolvable debates that arise from underspecified claims. This is the swamp of pseudoscience and much weak science. Claims like consciousness collapses the wave function or this device taps zero-point energy are poetic, evocative, and utterly untestable as stated because they lack a well-formed HLS metastructure. They have no clear O, T, P, or F. The firewall, by demanding HLS meta compliance, drains this swamp. It forces proponents to put up or shut up. Translate your poetry into a testable contract. To understand this with cultural depth, consider the analogy of Eloya Jilga, the Grand Traditional Assembly of Afghanistan, drafting a fundamental constitutional article. Imagine the article is meant to define a core national principle, like justice or representation. If the delegates write a beautiful but vague line of poetry, Justice shall flow like the waters of the Helmand. The result will be chaos. Every district, every judge, every faction will interpret it differently. There will be no consistent application, no way to hold power to account, no basis for stable law. The meta-language of a constitution is different. A well-formed constitutional clause in a modern framework must have ontological declaration. This article governs the branch of the judiciary. Triunity clause. It must address timing, when judges are appointed, term lengths, structure, the hierarchy of courts, their jurisdictions, and procedure, how cases move through the system, the coupling between citizens and the courts. Syntactic form. Precise, unambiguous language. The Supreme Court shall consist of 9 justices appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. Assumptions registry. This assumes a separation of power system. This assumes a functioning civil society. Prediction protocol. If a law is challenged, the process in Articles X and Y will be followed, resulting in a judgment within Z months. Falsification condition. If the court issues a ruling based on undisclosed ex parte communications, the principle of impartial justice is falsified for that case. License scope. This framework applies to federal law. Tribal law may operate under parallel principles defined elsewhere. Only with this level of formal structure does the constitutional rule become operational, testable in the court of law and politics, and amendable. The Loya Jirga, in its wisest form, acts as the firewall, rejecting poetically pleasing but unworkable proposals and insisting on well-formed, actionable text. HLS-Meta does exactly this for the constitution of physical law. In Holophase terms, the constitution is the set of canonical constraints governing phi. HLS-Meta is the drafting protocol. Now, let's delve into the triunity clause with a technical example. Consider the rule of wave propagation in a uniform medium. A poetic version: waves travel beautifully, carrying energy. The HLS-Meta well-formed version is O. This rule constrains perturbations delta phi of the holophase field. T. Omega constraint. The temporal evolution is second order. The perturbation oscillates sinusoidally in time with frequency omega. K constraint. The spatial structure is second order. The perturbation has a sinusoidal spatial pattern with wave number k. V constraint. The oscillation frequency omega and wave number k are coupled by the dispersion relation, omega equals v times k, where v is a constant characteristic speed of the medium. The motion is linear propagation. Dou squared delta phi b dot t squared is equals v squared del squared delta phi. Assumes a linear, homogeneous, isotropic, lossless medium. Assumes small perturbations, delta phi, background phi. To test, generate a perturbation at a point, measure its frequency omega and spatial wavelength lambda. Hence k equals 2 pi over lambda at a distance. Calculate v right equals omega over k. Compared to the known material constant v, they must match within measurement uncertainty. If a measured perturbation is found where omega and k do not satisfy omega equals v times k within experimental uncertainty, and the assumptions, homogeneity, linearity, hold, the rule is falsified. Proposed scope. For mechanical and electromagnetic waves in the stated media, for frequencies and wavelengths where the medium's properties are constant. This rule is now testable. 2 independent labs will know exactly what to do and what would break the rule. Now we must connect this to energy as tally. In the HLS-Meta framework, energy statements are derived accounting claims that only make sense after the rule is well formed. You cannot legitimately talk about energy conservation until you have a well-formed rule R that defines the system, its constraints, the triunity clauses, and the derived quantities. Before that, energy conservation talk is often a category error, like trying to balance a ledger before defining the currency and the rules of transaction. The energy tally is computed from the omega kV relations specified in the rule. If the rule is poorly formed, the energy concept is floating, unmoored, and often misused to protect bad ideas. The energy comes from the quantum vacuum. Think of it like the national budget of a country. You cannot have a meaningful debate about a budget surplus or deficit until you have a well-formed fiscal rule metalanguage. This metalanguage defines what counts as revenue, ontology. What are the timeframes, departmental structures, and transfer mechanisms, triunity? What are the exact accounting standards, syntax? What are the economic assumptions, registry? What is the procedure for calculating the deficit, prediction protocol? What would constitute a violation of the fiscal rule, falsification? Only with this metalanguage can you say the budget is balanced or there is a deficit. Without it, every politician can claim their own version of balance using creative accounting. HLS-Meta prevents creative accounting in physics. The operational interpretation of this firewall function is the practice of pre-registration and detailed method sections in rigorous science, elevated to a formal standard. When a theorist proposes a new rule, they must submit it in HLS-Meta format to a registry. Experimentalists then consult the registry, examine the rules P, prediction protocol, and F, falsification condition, and design an experiment. The rules A, assumptions registry, tells them what conditions to uphold or vary. This creates a clean, unambiguous pipeline from theoretical idea to experimental test. The firewall role is to be the syntax gate. You are drafting the constitution of rules. The firewall rejects any rule that cannot be parsed, typed, or operationalized. It checks: is the ontological declaration pure phi? Is the triunity clause complete? Is the syntactic form mathematically consistent? Are the assumptions clear? Is the prediction protocol executable? Is the falsification condition concrete and observable? Is the scope proposal reasonable? If any component is missing or incoherent, the rule is bounced back for revision. It does not enter the testing pipeline. Let's state clearly what assumptions are allowed and forbidden. Allowed: you may propose a rule with a narrow scope, with many background assumptions, or with complex mathematics. You may be uncertain about parameters. All of this can be documented in the HLS-Meta tuple. You may not propose a rule in a form that is ambiguous, incomplete, or lacks any of the mandatory components: O, T, S, A, P, F, L. You may not use undefined terms. You may not have a silent or implicit triunity clause. You may not have a falsification condition that is impossible to meet in principle. This rule is falsified if we find a contradiction, which is a logical check, not an empirical one. What happens when the check fails? The license consequence is immediate and procedural. Fail, rule is not admissible. It cannot enter the testing pipeline. It must be rewritten until it becomes testable. This is not a judgment on its truth, but on its readiness for science. It is returned to the proposer with a checklist of deficiencies. This prevents the scientific literature from being clogged with untestable speculations that generate endless, fruitless debate. Now we must state the explicit prediction and falsification for the HLS-Meta framework itself. Prediction: if HLS-Meta is consistently applied, two independent labs will translate the same proposed rule into the same canonical form, or provably equivalent forms, and they will agree on what the rule is claiming. There will be no fundamental disagreement about what the rule says, what it predicts for a given experiment, or what would falsify it. The prediction is interpretive unanimity among competent practitioners. This is the bedrock of cumulative science. Falsification condition for the rule's well-formedness. If different readers, competent theorists, or experimentalists produce incompatible meanings, predictions, or falsification criteria from the same rule text because the text is ambiguous or underspecified, then the rule fails well-formedness. The falsifying act is the demonstration of irreducible interpretive disagreement. If you need the rule's author to constantly clarify what they really meant, the rule is poetical, not scientific. A historical example of this failure is the early decades of quantum mechanics. The Copenhagen interpretation was, in many ways, a collection of poetic operational rules without a clean HLS-Meta formulation. This led to decades of debates about what the wave function really is, when collapse happens, and what constitutes a measurement. The formalism worked for calculations, but the meta rule about its application was ill-formed. This spawned countless incompatible interpretations, many worlds, pilot wave, objective collapse, which are, in essence, different attempts to provide the missing HLS meta structure, the clear O, T, A, and F for the same syntactic core. The firewall would have demanded this clarity at the outset, potentially guiding a faster convergence. Now, let's explore an Afghanistan-inspired analogy that ties together the need for a meta-language in a complex practical domain. The Karez Irrigation Management Contract. A Karez is a communal resource. The rules for water allocation, maintenance duties, and conflict resolution have evolved over centuries. An oral, traditional set of rules might be poetic. Water is life. Share it fairly and maintain the mother well. This is profound, but leads to disputes. A well-formed rule in a modern water governance meta-language would look like this. O. Ontology. This rule governs the resource. Water volume in the Karez, measured in sang, a traditional unit related to flow time. T. Tri-unity. Omega clause. Water turns are allocated in 12-hour intervals, beginning at sunrise on Monday. The schedule repeats weekly. K clause. Allocation is per land parcel connected to specific distribution outlets, dalak, along the secondary channels. The flow from the mother well to each parcel is governed by the unblocked state of the tunnel and the agreed time schedule. The coupling is time slot opens, flow to a specific spatial outlet. S. Farmer A, parcel X, gets equal to every Monday, 6 to 1800. Assumptions, normal seasonal flow. Assumes no upstream blockage. Assumes all maintenance duties fulfilled. P. Prediction protocol. If you inspect outlet X on Monday at noon, you should observe water flowing to parcel X. Falsification condition. If, under normal conditions and fulfilled duties, outlet X is dry during its assigned Monday slot, the allocation rule is falsified, broken. L. Scope. This rule applies during the spring and summer irrigation season. Winter rules are different. With this meta-language, every farmer knows exactly what the rule is, what it promises, what their duties are, and what constitutes a violation. Disputes are resolvable by checking the contract against observable facts. The traditional council, acting as the firewall, would insist on such clarity before endorsing a rule for the community. HLS-Meta does this for the community of scientists. Now, we must state the mandatory episode 11 axioms, now encoded into the very structure of rulemaking. Rules do not become real by elegance, consensus, or tradition. They earn a license only by surviving falsification, variation, independence, and scope discipline. HLS-Meta is the tool that enforces the possibility of this survival. It ensures a rule is even capable of being falsified by requiring an F, tested under variation by defining scope L and assumptions A, and examined independently by providing unambiguous P. It instills scope discipline from the outset. And when a rule fails, we do not believe harder. We tighten, downgrade, or retire its license. The first failure can be at the syntax gate. Failure to be well-formed leads to license denied for testing. The skill you gain from this part is whole drafting and whole auditing. You learn to write scientific claims with the precision of a legal document, and to deconstruct vague claims by demanding their HLS-Meta components. This skill is essential for clear thinking, for productive collaboration, and for protecting the integrity of science from hype and confusion. This has immediate application in cutting-edge fields like quantum foundations, cosmology, and consciousness studies, where poetic language often masquerades as theory. Demanding an HLS-Meta formulation separates the wheat from the chaff with brutal efficiency. Finally, let's summarize the epistemic function of this part. We have defined the meta rule as the formal system for constructing well-formed, testable rules. A well-formed rule is a tuple. R is equal to O, T, S, A, P, F, L, encompassing ontology, triunity, syntax, assumptions, prediction protocol, falsification condition, and scope. The triunity clause is mandatory and explicit. Energy statements are derived consequences, not primary components. The firewall acts as the syntax gate, rejecting any rule that cannot be parsed into this structure. The explicit prediction is interpretive unanimity. Independent labs will derive the same testable meaning from a well-formed rule. The explicit falsification condition for well-formedness is demonstrable interpretive disagreement arising from ambiguity. The license consequence is non-admissibility until the rule is rewritten to meet the meta-language standards. This strengthens the firewall by providing the ultimate pre-filter. It ensures that the costly and sacred process of empirical testing is only invoked for claims that are clear, complete, and honor the structure of reality, triunity, in their very formulation. It is the final guard against waste, obscurantism, and confusion. It teaches reality how to speak to us, and teaches us how to listen. If you want to see the full mathematical derivations and exact equations behind this idea, you can search for Holophase on Zenodo. There you will find the scientific papers that this audio journey is built on. Carry the discipline of HLS-Meta with you. Let it be your standard for clear thought. Before you are swayed by a grand claim, demand its O, T, and F. Before you present an idea, draft it in full. This is the habit of a true scientist. Now we bridge to the final, culminating question. We have a well-formed, clear rule. Now we can write a rule. But writing isn't enough. What must be proven before the rule is allowed to live? This leads us to the final gate, the licensing protocol. Salam, and peace be upon you.